I started going to conferences, autism conferences in 2012, and that was like 1 in 68 then. And this is basically evidence of a broader epidemic. But in the last 25 years, it's not just autism that has increased by 6,000%. According to Beth Lambert and a wonderful organization called Epidemic Answers, ADHD has increased 400%, asthma 300%, allergies 400%. So it's just showing that it's not genetics. Genetics don't cause epidemics like this, but you've probably heard the phrase, genetics loads the gun, but environment pulls the trigger. And so certain genetics can, of course, make you more vulnerable to developing autism, but these could be the same genetics that make one more vulnerable to developing Parkinson's or depression, cancer, anxiety, or a number of other conditions. And may have more to do with somebody's ability to methylate, to detoxify, to process environmental stressors that are just part of living in this modern world. And that's just because I enjoy word art. So these are just some of the comorbidities, and you can read there. And the contributing factors. So these are all possible contributing factors. Not all are prevalent in all people with autism, but I'll just read the headings. So genetic factors, the brain structure, brain function, synaptic dysfunction, neurochemical and neurotransmitter imbalances, mitochondrial dysfunction, the immune system dysregulation, and environmental factors. So a lot of the exposure to toxins, pollutants, heavy metals, pesticides, drugs, etc. And so it is a perfect storm. There's a lot of researcher clinicians who talk about the timing of these exposures, that they can have an impact on the gene expression. So there's certain critical time periods where there's an increased plasticity in the brain and other biological systems, and they're particularly sensitive to some of these external stimuli. So potentially the interventions during those periods could help mitigate some of the negative outcomes and support optimal development, which is why PBM at early age might be really helpful. There's some doctors like Dr. Goodnow, I'll mention him later. He says ASD is actually an environmental disorder masquerading as a neurological disorder. So you're not born with autism, but you do develop it. And they tend to diagnose it around 18 months to 24 months. So this is from Dr. Michael Hamlin. He says about 80% of children with ASD could have abnormal mitochondrial functions. And he explains there's disturbances in synaptic development and impairments in neurogenesis. And he brings up excessive neuroinflammation. This image is from a paper by Catherine Hamilton called Lights On for Autism, Exploring Photobiomodulation as an Effective Therapeutic Option. On the left, the red side is the autism side. And then compared to the right side, which is green, and it's the normal side or the side if you have PBM treated. So she's just showing that there's autism on the left has altered microbiome, decrease in the cerebellum, increased levels of BDNF, inflammation, decrease in long-range connectivity, synaptic imbalances in functional connectivity, and dysfunction, oxidative stress, increases in the local interconnectivity. So Hamilton hypothesized that all these abnormalities will improve after PBM treatment. But she also is talking about the head and the abdomen. Again, another paper by Rodriguez, Evidence of Microglial Activation in Autism and its Possible Role in Brain Interconnectivity. This is showing evidence that children with ASD suffer from ongoing neuroinflammatory processes in different regions of the brain involving microglial activation. In the article on the right by Vargas, Neuroglial Activation and Neuroinflammation in the Brain of Patients with Autism also found 100% of the subjects exhibited microglial activation. And it was across all ranges, male, female, everybody. So what is microglial activation? This is short-term. It's perfect. It's fine. It's doing what it's supposed to do. They protect the brain by clearing harmful agents and promote tissue repair. But it's the prolonged or chronic or excessive activation that's the problem. And that can lead to chronic neuroinflammation, which could lead to neurodegeneration. And if you've ever heard of Dr. Datis Kazarian, he has this great analogy. He describes like the arms being chopped off and leading to this amoeba type shape. And this is the activated state. And up here is like the resting state. And he says it's not reversible. And I don't know the research well enough to know if that's true, but that's what he claims. And potentially certain disease states, certain brain conditions, maybe it is possible to reverse it, but he says it's not. This paper by Nikodimova Age development differences in microglial responses to systemic inflammation are evident as early as middle age. It's talking about the conclusion, basically states we suggest the exposure of microglia to systemic inflammation at critical periods, and in this case, such as middle age, may set the stage for CNS vulnerability to neurodegeneration and other neural disorders associated with neuroinflammation. So, kind of the continuum of impact. Early activation could influence neurodevelopment, potentially leading to the disorder such as autism. And later activation is more associated with neurodegeneration. And that's why some doctors will describe Alzheimer's as autism in an adult, which is an oversimplification, but they do share similar mechanisms such as the microglial inflammation, microglial activation, neuroinflammation, immune system dysregulation. And many of the interventions are similar, but the manifestations can be different. So there are different theories, different camps. I like Dr. Goodenough's explanation the best because he supports it really well with research. But he describes the root underlying cause is the mitochondrial insufficiency and dysfunction, not to be confused with disease, not mitochondrial disease, but dysfunction. And so the root biochemical consequence of that is neuroinflammation. And then the root physiological cause of the child's developmental delays is the disrupted and problems with the myelination. So if you have prolonged inflammation and mitochondrial insufficiency, the biochemical reserves of the brain are completely depleted, and inflamed brains need a lot more nutrition in order to just continually repair itself. So the consequences of uncontrolled inflammation and the uncontrolled immune response lead to neurodegeneration, demyelination, and compromised brain function. So, and he goes through, there's so many different things that could cause inflammation in the brain. But the point is, if your brain is not able to keep up with it, then it becomes perpetual. So if you have a brain that can repair itself and has all the nutrients, then that could be fine. But if you have an unhealthy brain, it's just struggles to keep up. And he just goes a little bit more. This goes more into the biochemistry. And he's just explains that mitochondrial dysfunction or insufficiency leads to membrane peroxidation. That then activates the microglia, which causes inflammation. The activated microglia exports glutamate to kill those damaged cells. Then the astrocytes that try to neutralize that. Then the high levels of glutamate damage the healthy cells. They're kind of weak now. And then it does this by causing mitochondrial stress. So the newly damaged cells activate more microglia, and it just becomes a cycle. And it's the root cause of autism, or the neurological aspects of autism. Now, this is from Dr. Pablo Casano. It's very similar to Hamilton's diagram in a way. So he also talks about mitochondrial dysfunction, the increased ROS, the microglia activation, astrocyte activation, and pro-inflammatory cytokines. So microbiome and the leaky gut, I'll just briefly, I do talk a little bit more about the brain-gut axis, but the leaky gut basically can lead to autoimmunity and neurodegenerative disorders. So the gut communicates with the brain through the vagus nerve, and the majority of information goes from the gut to the brain, so maybe 70%-ish. But the brain also sends signals to the gut. So that's why people could treat either one or both together. And these are some of the papers on the brain-gut or gut-brain axis. It's implicated in so many neurodegenerative conditions, and it can trigger or suppress different chemicals in the brain. So the pathway of inflammation, it's been well researched, but it can show how changes in the microbiome can influence things like depression through the effect of gut inflammation on serotonin, on your brain chemicals. And you may have heard that someone has a concussion, they later on suffer from gut problems. And there are very few papers, though, showing PBM and how it changes the microbiome, but there is a human model by Bicknell and Ann Liebert and Parkinson's, and they literally show how the microbiome changes. And then there are quite a few animal models, there are more animal models than that. And Guillaume Blivet, if you can see him down here, he is one of the big researchers in that gut-brain axis and PBM, and he spoke last year in the discussion rounds. And this is his product, the Ridge in Life. And that's just an illustration. I didn't have a picture of this actual product. And this is Sarah Turner's product. And I can't not say anything about molds. I had to say something about mold. So this is just The highlighted in yellow are clinical findings of children with autism that could be explained by mold toxicity. And those are just the ones that were mentioned throughout the presentation. So you can see how sometimes you need to address an exposure before resolving a lot of the symptoms. So if you put PBM on a child, yeah, maybe it will help some of the symptoms, but there's so many other things going on. And so now back to how can PBM help with autism? This is that image from Dr. Paolo Cassano, the one on the left showing the problems. And then the one on the right is with the TPBM and how basically increases ATP, restores mitochondrial function, modulates ROS, decreases neuroinflammation, modulates immune activity, increases neuroplasticity, and increases cerebral blood flow. And that's what's in the neuronic brochure on ASD, showing how PBM could help with symptoms in autism. And basically that improving ATP results in more energy that would help with tissue repair, anti-inflammatory effects. The mood could improve by reducing inflammation. And because it can downregulate pro-inflammatory markers, modulate microglial activity, and of course, balancing or enhancing connectivity in the brain through neurogenesis, increasing neuroplasticity, and forming new synaptic connections. And Dr. Gonzalez Lima has shown how TPBM to the forehead could improve cognitive function like attention, executive function, and emotional regulations. And then based on current studies, the expected outcomes would be translated to the client to improve focus, eye contact, speech, behavior, and gains in functional skills. So the research that would support that, there's about 4. So this one is with VLI, 20 minutes, 5 days a week, 810 nanometers for 6 months, both the 10 hertz and 40 hertz, and the intranasal at the same time. And there were 21 people, and they were evaluated at 3 months and 6 months. And basically, the results were reduction in severity of ASD, the decrease in the childhood autism rating scale, and reduction in non-compliant behavior, and of course, caregiver and parental stress improved, reduction in behavioral cognitive rigidity, improvement in attention and sleep. And so the conclusion is a safe and effective. I'm going to pronounce, I don't know if it's Chironoglu or Seronoglu, but I think Italian Chironoglu. This was to assess safety and efficacy and tolerability in adults with autism. And it was twice a week with 830 nanometer to the forehead for 8 weeks. And they showed basically improvement in social awareness, social communication, repetitive behaviors, quality of life enjoyment, and satisfaction questionnaires. So they also said that there was a potential to treat core features of ASD, but they were mostly testing the safety efficacy. And then important to note here, which is also in another study, that 3 participants had mild side effects, so insomnia, headache, and warmth, but they all disappeared after. It did not continue. They went away. Now, Leisman, he did 8 5-minute treatments at the base of the skull and the temporal areas for 4 weeks using 635 nanometer. And there were 21 people, teens and kids, and they did a lot of tests, but the only conclusion in the results they highlighted was the irritability scale. And so they basically concluded that it can be an effective tool for reducing irritability and other symptoms and behaviors associated with ASD in children. Then Fradkin, this is another one that had side effects. So this is the Cognilum by Jalika Light, and this little picture on what it looks like. They treated over 8 weeks, twice a week, 6 minutes, and they have 6 LEDs on the forehead, pulsed at 40 hertz. It's a 850 nanometer, 300 milliwatts, and they built up gradually. They didn't just blast these kids. They went very slowly, and there were 30 people in the trial, but 16 were in the active group, and they're young, 2 to 6 years old. They used the EEG as a metric, so a before and after, and they also did the CARS questionnaire and the parental interviews, like weekly. So they found a decrease in delta waves, increase in theta waves, in the power of theta waves in the active group, and significantly improved ASD symptoms measured on that CARS and childhood autism rating scale score and the parental interviews, and improved eye contact, concentration, receptive, expressive language. And they also had the negative side effects, irritability, tics, headaches, overexcitement. But they also, nobody dropped out. So the benefits outweighed that inconvenience. And they concluded that it's a safe, effective treatment. Current clinical studies on PBM and autism, this is what I could find. So on the left is Dr. Pablo Casano's device, the Neurax, and the headband. And they're also expanding to people with autistic traits who have ADHD. So that will be interesting to see. Then on the right is using the Jelica light, Cognilon, and they're testing their app. So they have an app on the phone, but they're using the study to show that the platform is a good platform and a good way to measure these metrics. And then the one underneath it is Dr. Fry. He's big in the cerebral folate receptor antibody world and mitochondrial disease. So he's a really big researcher. He's just trying to show that it's safe for use in epileptiform or epilepsy in autism. So that'll be really good to see those results. And then the third one is Gonzalez Lima, and his group was given $3.7 million by Echo Foundation, and he's expecting 280 participants. So that'll be huge if that happens. So it's just showing the importance that it'd be great if we could collaborate with someone willing to do a study, because there's not many people in this space. And then, of course, there are patterns of electrical activity in autism, and there are patterns in the brain network abnormalities, e.g. showing underconnectivity, overconnectivity. But hopefully we'll have some conversations about that with Jordan moderating some of these topics at the discussion rounds today. There's the one study showing that our wavelength, the 1064 wavelength, can change electrical activity. It can modulate electrophysiology, neural oscillations in a human. And just so you're aware of the other neuromodulation approaches to ASD, because a lot of our clinics will use these different interventions. We don't know the impact of PBM plus all of these, except for neurofeedback. We hear that it's either makes neurofeedback more effective or need less sessions. But the other modalities, we really don't know. And then these are just little points picked up for sales that might be important when we're talking about kids. So some devices are going to be too big and they're just not suitable. So if there's the one study with showing that our wavelength, the 1064 wavelength, can change electrical activity. It can modulate electrophysiology, neural oscillations in a human. And just so you're aware of the other neuromodulation approaches to ASD, because a lot of our clinics will use these different interventions. We don't know the impact of PBM plus all of these, except for neurofeedback. We hear that it makes neurofeedback more effective. Yeah, that's it. See you later.